So it is less as an art critic than as a cultural historian that I will be probing the art of M.K. Čiurlionis to see how it could be understood in terms of two converging traditions of holistic interpretation of cultural shifts and mutations in consciousness, namely media ecology and integral thinking, that both frame modernism in art as an attempt to move beyond the classic Renaissance to Enlightenment modernity's rationalist assumptions. Integral thinking is represented here by linguist and philosopher Jean Gebser, whose magnum opus Ursprung und Gegenwart was co-translated from German by Algis Mitskunas as The Ever-Present Origin in 1985. Gebser sought to document and promote a time-free state of awareness that he recognized in certain realized figures across eras and cultures, such as Meister Eckhart and Zen masters, although it is mostly on the history of consciousness in the Western world that he relied to outline the phases of its transformations. He largely relied on art to sketch the contemporary emergence of, I quote, an innate spiritual presence characterized by diaphaneity or transparency to man as a whole, and the interplay of the various consciousness structures which constitute him. Archaic, magic, mythic, mental, and the aperspectival that finally allows them all to coexist in multifarious unity as, I quote, four-dimensional integrality which is space and time free and cannot be manifest in any visible form, though it can be felt in certain ways of handling it, of which I will find examples in Čiurlionis. I first want to suggest that most of Gebser's consciousness structures seem to find thematic illustration in Čiurlionis' pictorial art, starting with the archaic as prehistoric origin, akin to the original state of biblical paradise, prior to notions of time and space, as in his own version of the creation of the world, where this zero state becomes a one-dimensional unity or point in the pre-perspectival, spaceless, timeless, magical structure that gives man magical power over things as a maker in a time, or rather before our consciousness of time. So that would be the magical stage. The two moments seem counterpoised in the 1904 sketches of Čiurlionis' stained glass diptych depicting Rex, the creator who molds man in the first panel amidst a tangled wild garden, whereas it is man who makes an image of the maker in the second, its background striated by trunks marking the passage of time to the sunset as intimately linked to the human drive to make, often to represent origins. In contrast to this prehistory, Jean Gebser construes the mythical era as ancient history, typified by the Egyptian, Babylonian, and Mayan cultures with their sacred astronomical calendars, systematizing an awareness of natural temporality. In such pyramid-building ancient civilizations that Čiurlionis liked to evoke, there thus arose an unperspectival, two-dimensional polarity between the emergent internal world of the soul and the external universe, between summer and winter, daylight and darkness, midday and midnight, rising and setting, maternal and paternal, mystery and exposure, as evidenced in Greek myths. The mythical structure achieves unification by complementarity and correspondence, tying polarities together within a circle like that of the year, in a realm of imagination where a conclusion is not drawn but ends in the same place the process began. Such dualities are enfolded within the fully developed Rex that is Čiurlionis' crowning achievement, but for a few significant differences. What we see is not a circle, but sections of spheres within spheres. Rarely do we find in the classic modern artist Gebser mentions in this regard such a transparent depiction of the sphere as his symbol for the integral consciousness structure. I quote, an a-rational, a-perspectival, a-categorical, a-causal, a-material, a-psychic, present, open, transparent, and whole-oriented approach to the world. The A particle demonstrates the inability for dualistic distinctions such as rational or irrational to express the integral. The integral transcends conceptual barriers typical of the mental structure, with transparency or diaphaneity as the form of manifestation or epiphany of the spiritual. Thus, unlike iconic pre-modern art forms, modern painting is not simply unperspectival. It does not negate perspective, particularly the effect of depth that is attainable. What subsists of it in the hybrid icon that is Rex makes it all the more breathtaking for the sense of real spatial extension that is yet taken up with inexhaustible symbolic density within the economy of Gebser's aperspectival consciousness, as the former depth effect restructures itself into transparency, freeing itself of the dominance of merely sectorial linear perspective. Such conventional perspective was the hallmark of sight's dominance of the other senses since the advent of print as a technology, according to Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian literary scholar who founded the other discipline I bring to bear on Čiurlionis, media ecology. McLuhan saw modern artists as the antenna of the race. That's actually a quote from Ezra Pound. And I know that this morning there was a mention of Röhrig mentioning the antenna that Čiurlionis seemed to have. So it's not uncommon in avant-garde circle. So McLuhan saw modern artists as the antennae of the race, anticipating culture's recalibration of the senses to postmodern conditions brought about by the electric environment, which he characterized as neo-acoustic, in that it retrieved many aspects of the oral cultures and scribal civilizations prior or outside what he called the Gutenberg galaxy of print-based literacy, culminating in industrial societies. On the margins of a modernist canon privileging Western artists born to these industrial conditions, Čiurlionis is unique in embodying a direct bridge between older oral cultures before print and the new electric environment that recovered their reliance on non-causal pattern recognition across a variegated perceptual field. This could be argued on the basis of his art alone, but serendipitous details of his biography suggest concrete as well as symbolic connections between oral culture and electric environment. Aside, of course, from their poetic connection through amber, the material for which Lithuania was dimly known to literate cultures of the ancient world as being known as electron in Greek, after which electricity was named on account of its electrostatic properties in the modern period. As a provincial from Dzūkija, steeped in Lithuania's vibrant oral culture of traditional singing and storytelling, Čiurlionis was first exposed to the full range of classical instruments as a pupil of the orchestral school of Prince Michael Nicholas Oginski's manor in Plungė, which today houses the Samogitian Art Museum. Čiurlionis was thus called upon to perform with the other Oginski court orchestra, that of his employer's brother Prince Bogdan Oginski in Rietavas, the first electrified city in Lithuania, one whose vistas of shining church towers may have been amplified in the painter's fantastical urban panoramas. The first power plant in Lithuania was built there in 1892, when the electricity line to Prince Bogdan's palace and park was installed. That year, the first light bulbs in Lithuania were lit in Rietavas Manor, and Čiurlionis must have been greatly impressed by the Easter morning celebrations on April 17th, 1892, at the Church of St. Michael the Archangel. To the sound of the church choir and the orchestras of the Oginski brothers, in which Čiurlionis was playing, the historic 100-bulb chandelier that remains the pride of Rietavas was lit up for the first time under the church vaults supporting the sky in a highly symbolic overlap of timeless ritual and space-time cancelling technology. I quote here from, I think, a Rietavas website. Only 11 years had passed since Thomas Edison presented the world's first light bulb at the International Electric Exhibition in Paris in 1881. But 1882 saw Edison's first purpose-built power plant in New York City, but also the first telephone in Lithuania. A 54-kilometer-long private line connecting Rietavas Manor to other estates in Plungė, Kretinga, and Palanga was built by the Oginskis, but just 6 years after the invention of the telephone, directly joined the acoustic and the electric. Later on in Warsaw, Čiurlionis' creativity expanded to visual arts, inspired by avant-garde aspirations to a synthesis of the arts. He then absorbed the literature favored by symbolists, also investigating the exotic spiritual currents and remote cultures that helped them in their turn away from the rationalist materialism induced by print-based Western civilization. An Italian art critic indebted to McLuhan, Renato Barilli, wrote of early 20th century symbolists that they sensed the need for electromorphism, but it was realized through the mediation of nature, which is closer to the new sources of energy than were the forms of the industrial mechanical world. If McLuhan saw the decisive turn away from that world in the symbolist movement, he took Cubism as the best example of the mosaic effect of multiple viewpoints brought about by electric conditions. Gebser also considered Cubism exemplary and might have dismissed Čiurlionis for retrieving magic and mythic structures rather than embracing the new world's concreteness, as most modernist masters did after a short-lived primitivist period in the early 1900s. Instead of this, Čiurlionis dug deeper into dimensions disclosed by ancient cultures, opening a space-time of his own from materials drawn from them, which he imbued with telltale electromorphic features under a deceptively naive guise. At the most literal level, this is a world brimming with electricity, where sparks fly and lightning flashes in repeating wave patterns, while summits and pyramids are crowned with St. Elmo's fire, often radicalizing the reverse perspective of Orthodox icons in depicting them as larger in the distance and closer to the picture plane, as though to embody their identity with the unlocatable vastness of resonant space as such. As in Persian painting for McLuhan, the two-dimensional features many spaces in multi-level time, in contrast to the three-dimensional illusion of depth in one space and one time, characteristic of the Gutenberg galaxy of print. Čiurlionis' ambition to depict the creation of a world unlike our own, with its own ways of counting time, its own scale and spatial proportions, where temporal and cause and effect sequences have shifted, reflects both the new time consciousness, according to Gebser, and the departure from print-based sequential thought, according to McLuhan. As an electricity's resulting discontinuous space, in what Felix Rosiner in 1989 described as archetypal painting, Čiurlionis' space ceases to be one entity. It is torn apart, windows form in it onto other inner spaces, reflecting the inner trip of spiritual insight as opposed to modernity's perspective outlook in blurred images such as McLuhan would associate with low-definition cool media like analog TV, demanding engagement and completion by viewers. As in McLuhan's audile tactile space conjoining all senses in resonant analogies, instead of privileging visual concatenation and homogeneous extension, rhythmic organization, repetition, semantic enigmas, generalization of elements, transformation of spatial relations lead to a temporal perception where visual impressions last longer, functioning by pattern recognition through time, like music. This is key to Čiurlionis' pictorial sonata series, which do not follow a clear narrative sequence, but rely on the viewer not so much to connect the dots as to subliminally become attuned to open-ended resonances between differently arranged visual and thematic motifs. These are what makes whole and parts come alive, like the repetitions and variations within a Sutartines hypnotic oral spiral of borderline nonsense, or meandering Baltic folktales about a glass mountain, for instance. Čiurlionis' pictures are just often titled pasaka, suggesting that as tales, they are to be received like oral transmission through the whole body. For whereas realists had endeavored to understand the world by looking, the symbolists believed that reality would only offer up its secrets to those who could listen on the deepest level. If, for McLuhan, the great discovery of the 20th century in art and physics alike, exemplified by both symbolism and the wave-particle duality, was the technique of the suspended judgment, we also find another illustration of it in Čiurlionis' use of the paranoid critical method decades before Dali, likewise featuring bells as a potent symbol of the acoustic space. In Čiurlionis' case, this may echo their ringing as supposedly sometimes heard on quiet evening in his beloved Raigardas Valley, if one listened intently, said to come from underground, namely from a sunken city struck by the wrath of the thunder god Perkunas for its self-indulgence. In the Middle Ages and throughout rural Europe until fairly recently, the sound of a church bell would have defined a certain social space created by the sound itself, by resonance, that is, by resonance tied to the rhythmic discontinuity of acoustic space that produces meaning through gaps, which for McLuhan also give it the tactile quality of the fecund interval, not unrelated to Oriental concept of interval like ma in Japanese aesthetics. Thus textured as audible tactile space, for McLuhan, the auditory dynamic of the total electric field culture of our time brings about the shift of specialized segments of attention to total field in physics, as in paintings, poetry, and in communication, whose web of instantaneous interconnection up to the furthest reaches of space-time makes it possible to apprehend again, as in former eras before print, the simultaneity of vibrant correspondences between microcosm and macrocosm, as it shares the essential feature of sound, which is not its location, but that it be. It is no wonder then that ancient worlds seem to come alive together with parallel ones in the virtual reality of today's cutting-edge electronic media technologies, enabling us to actually enter the boundless sphere of aperspectival consciousness Jean Gebser talked about as the postmodern stage of cultural development, revealed in the lightning flash of a short circuit between orality and electricity. As a final picture to symbolize their conjunction in Čiurlionis' world, I leave you with one I took a couple of weeks ago in front of the Devil's Boulder at Schwendubre near Raigardas Valley, where the bell in an old-style wooden sculpture resonates with the power lines in the wood behind. Thank you.
Hola. Aha, can you hear me? One minor thing that disrupts the reception of Čiurlionis, his integral dimension, is the underlying current global trend toward fragmentation. Mathematics is the ultimate outcome of it. Everything is divided into pulverizing. So that what Gebser called deficient mental, rational consciousness, the perspectival. And when this fragmentation also appears in mistaken language, when we say, well, we have many perspectives. I have mine, you have yours, and none shall meet. In short, there is no integration. And when I talked about cosmos, Čiurlionis would say, I cannot take a perspective on the universe, okay? From which side do I see it? Okay, so here's already defiance of perspectivity. And so we cannot take a perspective on Čiurlionis' work. So we have to be in and with it. And so that's, so to speak, what I used to call the mathematical metaphysics gone wild, fragmentation, digitalization, and up to the point where multi-culti, which each one has a perspective, but none shall meet. Thank you.
Well, I would answer to that that may be true of certain cultural elites that still live in the defective specialization of the Gutenberg galaxy, but the general public gets Čiurlionis. It's quite obvious in Lithuania, and they can enter his world into virtual reality. I mean, there's endless interest. That people get the general public. They just live these new conditions, and they can readily enter immersively Čiurlionis' world. They don't have to try where to fit it, and that resonates with the discrepancy the British gentleman who asked a question before that mentioned before the very positive general reception of Čiurlionis and the complete indifference in the literature. Yeah, they're just holdovers from the Gutenberg galaxy and the perspectival thinking.
Numbers disconnect, but vibrations connect, especially cosmic vibrations. They resonance in us all. And some more questions.
Actually, well, maybe because I'm from another generation, I think a little bit differently about fragmentation of society, etc., and about the democratization of various, how you say that, opinions about the world, etc. Anyhow, but my question is, and actually that's also what I was puzzled about your keynote this morning, is when we talk about cosmic and all that similar issues with Čiurlionis, which are definitely there, why there is no mention now about his reception of Flammarion and his reception of Theosophy? I haven't heard that today.
Maybe not yet, but I know there's people around here like Vytautas Tumanas who's very well aware of all these aspects. Yeah.
If I can just reply, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Some years ago in Vilnius, I gave a keynote at a Čiurlionis conference. In that keynote, I made what I thought was a very obvious comparison between the pictures by Annie Besant, the Theosophist, and Čiurlionis. There are some startling similarities. Immediately then, I was told very firmly that Čiurlionis did not believe in Theosophy and did not follow it. So I think there's more going on here than we realize.
There's cultural antibodies at work.
Yeah, I think it was Jagdvida actually who firmly denied that he had any connection with Theosophy. It seems to me, as an outsider, very obvious, but I couldn't go further than that.
It's everywhere, yes. But I think he comes up with his own version of it. That's what's really interesting. He recreates it as an artist, yeah.
One more minor thing to mention. There is, during the time and little after Čiurlionis, a great movement in Europe and many other parts of the world, and it was known as the literature and poetry of the demonic. Trakl and so on, Haim and even Baudelaire, and that was sort of a movement that we have to destroy the world, pulverize it to zero, and then start afresh, and in fact they said, war is not enough, the demonic should come, and the heaven is crashing, there's no longer hell, everything is being destroyed. And that demonic literature was part of what we call now is endarkment of contemporary world.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, that was of course very strong in the Russian culture. That it happened. I mean, with Alexander Blok celebrating the Bolsheviks as led by Christ in the 12, or Scriabin music sort of moving in that direction. So there's a kind of continuum with symbolism that it can go in that direction in sort of celebrating destruction. But I don't get that feeling from Čiurlionis, although the demonic is there, but it's not running the show.
Thus we will end. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for presentations and suggestions and questions. Thank you.